Hello everybody and welcome to today's video. I am so excited to be doing a knitting vlog today for a sweater pattern. So I'm currently wearing a sweater I knit myself and the pattern is by Kika, and so I will put a link to that in the description as well because it's super easy to learn if you are just starting out knitting sweaters. I've already made 3 of these and I'm working on a 4th because it's just that easy. But today's pattern, I wanted to do a little bit of color work, which is where a knit sweater has multiple colors in it. And so today's pattern is Mudo, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but M-U-D-O, and this pattern is by the Petite Knitter. She is a Canadian knitwear designer in Nunavut, so I'm super excited to try one of her sweaters out. And so this sweater, because it's color work, it's going to have 2 colors, a main color and a contrasting color. So for the main color, we have this beautiful burgundy red. I just got this yarn at Michael's, and it's a merino wool blend, so I'm super excited because it should be a very warm sweater. And then our contrasting color is this really light gray, a cool toned gray color. So I'm super excited to knit this sweater, and I kind of just wanted to bring you guys along for the process of what knitting a sweater looks like. So a lot of these clips are going to be very sped up. A sweater like this takes me at least 9 days is the fastest I've done one, but usually about like a week to 2 weeks. But since this is a new knitting pattern that I haven't done before, I'm anticipating that it's going to take me a little bit longer, so this is going to be a blog that goes over probably a few weeks. But with that being said, the first thing we are going to do is follow our pattern. I just have it written down in this book because my printer's out of ink. Normally I print them off. But we are going to be using a 4mm needle. The pattern calls for 3.5, but 4 is the closest that I have, so we're going to do that. So we're going to cast on the contrasting color and then immediately switch over to our main color to give it kind of that first row be a little bit of a contrast. And then we're going to knit the neckline, do the yoke, which is the section before you separate the sleeves, and then we're going to take the sleeves off onto holders, knit the body, and then come back to the sleeves. So this is describing what would be a top-down knit sweater. There are also sweater patterns that you knit from bottom up, but I seem to like the top-down method. So without further ado, I am going to get the camera set up. I'm going to put on a show and we are going to start knitting the sweater. So I'm sure that everybody has a different way to cast on their stitches. For me, I like to take my rope, I like to wrap it around my finger so that I have a loop, and then I just pull the tail end through just like this, and then this is what I will use to start my stitches, and it just pulls apart. So once again, that's just wrapping it around, pulling the tag underneath to make a loop, and there you have your first stitch. So we're just going to put this onto the needle, and also if you are a tight knitter like I am, remind yourself that this doesn't have to be super snug. And then to make a new stitch, you're going to put your needle through the loop that you've created. Make sure you grab the one that's not the tag end, and you're going to basically knit. So you're going to wrap it around, scoop the yarn through, pull it up, but then instead of sliding this stitch off, you're just going to pick it up again. Whether or not this is the right way to cast on, I'm sure there's lots of different ones. This is how I was taught / figured out how to do it. So we are going to cast on 88 for my size, which I'm doing a size 4 in this pattern for reference. It is a unisex pattern as well, so I think that's super cool, and I will have a link to the Petite Knitter's website and this specific pattern as well in the description if you guys are curious or if you want to also knit one. And if you are a knitter who has Ravelry, I'm also on Ravelry as Homesteading Sask. But I think if you search Shayna Cassette, it comes up as well, but I'm not entirely sure about that. So I'm just going to continue casting onto our needle. This is a fairly large wire size, which is the length. for starting off a sweater. Normally you would use something more like this. This is a 3.25 millimeter, so it's a little bit smaller than what the pattern calls for. So I prefer a looser fit rather than a tighter fit with my knit sweaters, so I chose to do a size bigger, just because I would rather knit it a little bit bigger than a little bit too small. So I'm going to see if it works with a size this big, but you can also use, I think it's called the magic loop method, which basically is when you have your stitches on the wire part but your wire is too big, you just kind of pull it through the stitch so that you have a big extra loop here, and then that makes this part stay connected with all the extra here, and then you just continue knitting around until you need to move it. So I'm going to just continue casting this on. Alright, so I know that I said I was going to use the longer ones and not go to a smaller diameter, but I don't quite have enough stitches to really make that one work, and since it's not a metal wire like these red ones are, it's a little less flexible and it's harder to actually do the magic loop method with that one. So I have switched to just the 3.25 millimeter needle, which is only 0.5 millimeter smaller than what the actual pattern calls for, so I'm hoping it doesn't make too crazy much of a difference. Now, anybody who's a really avid knitter is going to be screaming at their computer screens right now, or laptops or TVs or phones, saying, why aren't you doing a gauge swatch? And all a gauge swatch is you knit a certain number of stitches to usually about 4 inches or 4 centimeters, I think. And it will show you in the pattern if what you're knitting is making the same size as what the pattern is. And yes, you absolutely could be doing that, and that would probably be easier, but I am lazy. I just don't really feel like doing it. I rarely do gauge swatches, and sometimes that bites me. But for the most part, I just try to get as close as what the pattern calls for based on what I have, because there is no knitting shop here. I have to order everything in or drive to like Saskatoon or Prince Albert would be like the closest place to get some knitting supplies, which is about like a 13 to 14 hour drive depending on the road. So now that we have all of our stitches cast on, you have to join it in the round and also place a marker. So markers can be anything from like actually fabricated ones. So these are little rings that pop open so that you can feed them through if you're going in between 2 stitches, or all I do is just pop it on the end. There's our marker. And when you're joining in the round, you're going to pick up the end that you started on, and when you knit it, it connects it together and makes a loop. So that's how you make the neckline of your sweater. However, be very careful, because you want to make sure that all of your stitches are straight. If there was a twist in something, say like that, you would not be able to knit the garment because it would be all twisted around. So just make sure that all your stitches are on the same side, everything's in a straight line, and then you just quite literally bring them together, go through the loop of the first stitch that you created, and then once you knit it, that's joining it in the round. Now this pattern actually calls for you to switch colors when you are joining it. So I'm gonna just, am I gonna knit the first stitch or am I gonna switch colors right now? Maybe I'll do both. So to add in a color is actually really easy. Once you've put your stitch there, you just make a tail end and then you just knit it. So for this one, I chose to do both colors just for the first stitch, and then I'm gonna let the tail hang, and we're just going to continue knitting with the main color, and it will just tie itself in. And then there are neater ways to knit the tail ends into each other so that there's no gaps or anything like that, and there's no slipping of any stitches. I just double knot it. Like, it's not the quote-unquote technically right way to do it, but I just take the two ends and just do a little overhead knot, and then it's not gonna fall apart on me. So once we have everything, yeah, okay, so we got our main color here. Now I have to make sure we detach the gray one because we don't want it to get tangled up, so I'm just going to give it a tail end. And same with the other tail ends. I'm just going to throw in a little knot so I don't lose any stitches or have any unraveling. Right, like that. And that's it. We've changed color. So now I've gotten ahead of myself because we're going to do some ribbing. So we are going to knit 2 and purl 2. So I'm just going to back up here because I got ahead of myself, which I usually do when I'm learning a new pattern. One more. I'm really good at undoing knit stitches. I'm not so good at undoing purl stitches. Okay, so we've knit 2, which knitting for English knitting, which is what I do, is you stab it, strangle it, scoop out its guts, and throw it off the cliff. Is a really cute and also Halloween themed way. And then purling is the same, but you bring the strand closer to you and you go through backwards and purl it. So you're going to knit 2, purl 2, and continue that for the rest of the round, which the round is when you knit all the way back to this marker. And then we're just going to keep doing this over and over and over again until it measures 4 centimeters long. Alright, we have finished the first round with the main color after casting on, so you can kind of see how the gray is going to be the edge at the top, and then the rest of the neckline will be red. So we've done the ribbing, which you can kind of see with these gray stitches here, so purled versus knit, and then that's going to make like the lines in the ribbing. And then how I'm keeping track is sometimes if you have like a number of rows to knit, like say you have to knit like 16 rows, you can keep track with something like this. I got this from, it's a Knitter's Pride counter. There's lots of ones that are more like kind of turn dials, like they're a little bit more of like the older style, but I really like just being able to click a button and knowing that I've done one round. So this pattern specifically calls for a measurement of 4 centimeters, but I'm always really curious to know if I can place a number of rounds to that. So I am going to be keeping track of how many it takes. So now I'm just going to continue knitting until we get 4 centimeters, and I will come back and show you guys when we're at that point. All right, it is a couple hours later, and this is how far we've made it on the sweater. So you can see the ribbing effect that the knit 2 purl 2 created, and then I've just been working some increasing rows along the collar here, and now we are going to start working on the chart, which is where we'll start introducing the color work and also just additional increases to keep making it larger. And I found that I had some size 4mm needles that were on this metal length, I guess. I don't know what the proper term for this is, which is much easier to use the magic loop method for, so I'm just using this set instead, even though it's probably a little bit overkill for a sweater. So we are just going to be following the chart and making the increases. All right, so this is where we've gotten with the color work. We've done our rows of increases and we've done 2 rows of color work. And so how you do that is you just float the strands along the back. So when you go to knit and you pick up your stitch, you just pick up whichever color you're working with, and then just make sure you leave some looseness in the knit, otherwise you can bunch it together and actually make the item smaller than it's supposed to be. But so far I am absolutely loving this pattern. It's been super easy to follow, which is something I always look for as a beginner. And I'm also just really loving this color combination. So I'm going to continue knitting. We are done with all of our increases now, so we're just going to do 3 more of these alternating kind of like vine rows almost, or leaf rows. I'm not really sure how best to describe them. So we'll do 3 more of those. So that's the start of the 3rd one. And we'll do 2 more after, and then it will be time to separate the stitches for the sleeves versus the stitches for the front and back, and start doing the body of the sweater. So this part here is called the cowl, before you separate the sleeves, if I haven't already mentioned that. But yeah, so far really loving this pattern, and I think I'm gonna go back to the Petite Knitter shop and possibly get a slightly more complicated one, just because her patterns are really easy to follow. Alright, so we have been working on this sweater for about a week now. So we've separated the stitches off for the sleeves here, and then we're just working on increasing the body, just knitting in the round over and over and over again. And so we're trying to get this to be long enough for a sweater. So that's from the bottom of the graph down going to be 14.5 inches. So right now it's probably, I think, at about close to 10. So we're about 2/3 of the way done. And then once we get to the bottom of the sweater length, we are going to add the same size ribbed hem on, just like the top of the collar here. And the best part about this now is that you can take these sleeves. Right now I just have them on metal stitch holders, but you can run a piece of string or a different like knitting needle to open it up, and you can actually try it on and make sure that once you're done knitting it that it's actually the length that it needs to be. Or you can also just obviously hold it up to yourself. I do recommend standing up though, because when you're sitting it compresses your torso, and from experience you will knit it too short and need to unravel it to make it longer. So if you're gonna kind of assess size, make sure that you are standing up and holding it all the way up to the top. But this is what it's looking like so far. I really love how the gray and red look together. I think that's just really stunning. I tend to knit in a lot of darker colors because I spill a lot of things on myself and I don't trust myself with an all white sweater. But this is a really nice way to get a beautiful pattern. And you can probably see there's a lot of bubbling that's happening between the rows, and you can block your sweater after, and that will help relax all of that out. So as you're knitting it, don't worry if it looks a little lumpy or bumpy. The blocking will fix that. But this is the progress that we've made so far. So this is going along really well. It's not super complicated. Reading the chart went a lot better than I was expecting it to, honestly, because you just follow along. And there's only once or twice where I knit a wrong color stitch somewhere in the row and had to kind of take it back and reverse it. So just definitely, if it was more complicated, you'd have to pay more attention to it, but this is definitely beginner friendly. If you've never knit a sweater before, I would still recommend this pattern. there is some additional parts in the pattern that's like shaping the neck and shaping the chest, which look very complicated and intimidating, but it does say in the pattern that they're optional sections. So for mine, I just didn't do those parts and just skipped over and stuck to the rest of the pattern, and it has been really easy. So I'm sure if you did the shaping, it would change the fit a little bit, but so far I've been really enjoying it. Very easy, very straightforward pattern, and from a Canadian, which I always love to see. So I'm already shopping her website to find a second pattern to do that's slightly more complicated than this one, because yeah, I've just really been enjoying it. I've also thought about trying to make my own design within the same pattern that she has. So either way, I'll keep you guys updated on that, but just still knitting away. So we're gonna go all the way down to the bottom, and then we're gonna change to the gray for binding off, and then you just pick up the sleeves on the arm, knit one sleeve out, knit the other sleeve out, and that's basically all there is left to it. So I'm probably not gonna put a ton of more time lapses in of the actual knitting part. I know I don't have too many right now, but I think it's just gonna end up making the video much longer than it needs to be. So I'll keep doing these little updates as we're going along knitting, and kind of as I complete each next stage. So I'll show an update when I get to the hem of how long it is, and then a little bit of knitting the hem again, because we go back to the knit 2 purl 2. And I'll probably show changing the color over to gray to finish it, and then I'll show picking up the stitches on one of the sleeves and a little bit of knitting one of the sleeves, but then I'll probably just skip straight to the finished sweater at the end of that. But yeah, so far really like the pattern of the sweater. I'm really happy with the colors that I chose. I think size-wise this might be a little bit big on me. I might have been able to go down a size for a more fitted sweater, but the pattern did say it's supposed to be more of like a boxy fit. So in that case, I do think the measurements in the pattern are true to size, because I went based off my measurements, and just once again, I'm knitting a size 4 in this pattern. So yeah, it is supposed to be unisex as well, and I think it's a good sweater for it. But yeah, I am already thinking of which one I want to do next. I have an idea for doing a gray and kind of like light blue snowflake one, but she also has some really fun caribou designs, and as you guys can see from the picture behind me, we have a lot of caribou up here, and I've had the joy of getting to photograph caribou up north in the snow here, so I think that one could be a fun sweater for me to do as well. But yeah, I'm gonna keep knitting, and I will see you guys at the next update. So, based on my last clip, you have probably noticed that I stopped recording halfway through this process, because I had a few other things going on, and I just was really busy and not necessarily putting my best look on when I was knitting, and didn't want to look like a hermit on camera. So I've now finished this sweater. So we finished out making the body, and we did the rim and the hebbing, and then I added the sleeves, which those ones you just pick them up. There's lots of YouTube videos if you don't know how to pick up sleeves, and the pattern said to make the sleeves like X amount of inches. I just like to try the sweater on as I'm going, just because your measurements aren't going to be exactly the same, and you definitely can just follow the pattern, but I like my sleeves to fall kind of right at the end of my wrist, so I just chose to try it on as I was doing it to get the right length, and then I matched the other sleeve to the other side. So now that that was all done, then we weaved in our ends. I definitely found it a little bit harder to weave in ends with the contrasting color. You can kind of see here some of the gray is showing through, so I've just decided that that side's the back, just so it won't go through. And there's definitely probably better ways to weave in the ends than what I've done, but what I've done works. I just weave it through a few stitches and then knot it a whole bunch of times and cut the end off. So now you'll notice that it wants to flip up. The yoke is kind of like bubbly and textured, and the sleeves kind of want to scrunch a little bit. So to make it all your final finished sweater, you're gonna want to block it. And all blocking is you're going to fill up your sink, plug it, fill it up with warm water, probably not hot water, especially with the red, because you might get some dye leakage and it might go into the gray, but just warm water, and you're gonna completely submerge it, let it soak, and then you're gonna lay it flat on a towel to dry. And when you lay it flat, be sure to shape it properly. I am gonna film all this too, so that you get their kind of desired shape. And that's where, if you want to stretch the sleeves a little bit longer, you can do that. Make sure you keep your hem down so it doesn't flip up or has any weird memory in it, and that's also going to really flatten out this yoke piece. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I will show you guys after it's dried. So for blocking the sweater, I've just plugged the sink here, and I've got warm but not hot water, and so we're just going to fill up the sink probably about halfway here. So I'm going to jump ahead to when the sink's full. All right, so now that we have our sink full, all you want to do is submerge your item. And when you're submerging it, it's going to take a bit for the water to soak in, but you also want to make sure that you're squeezing gently, not twisting, just squeezing to get all those air bubbles out. And that's going to help your knit actually sink into the sink and not float at the top. And the goal of this blocking is just to get any inconsistencies out. And so right now you're just focused on getting the garment as fully soaked as possible. You want a lot of water absorption so that the stitches can all relax and it will lay nice and flat and give you a nice finished product. So as I suspected, the color, the red, is leaking out into the water a little bit. So definitely wouldn't want to do this in any hot water. You could even probably do this in cold if you needed to, but I don't like cold water on my hands, so this is what we get. Okay, so we are going to let this sit here and just soak for probably like 5 minutes for this one. If it wasn't bleeding dye into the water, I'd do it for 10, but I don't want to dye the gray stitches red, so we're just gonna do 5, and then I'll come back and show you how to take it out of here. Alright, so the timer went off. Now we're just going to let the water drain. And once again, the biggest key for this is to not wring it and twist the knit. We just want to squeeze the water out. Just letting it drip. And then the biggest thing is just squeezing as much of the water as possible. This is a lot easier with 2 hands, by the way. What I really should do is just grab my tripod, but the other thing you can do is just hold it up, let it drain, and then squeeze from the top and work your way down. I'm gonna set the camera down and finish squeezing this out, and then I'll show you guys the next part. So the next part is to lay a towel down in a place where it can lay to dry undisturbed for a while, which for me is our guest bedroom. So now you just want to lay out the sweater in the shape that you want it to dry. So this is where it's going to be really important to get everything laying nice and flat. And then if you needed to try to stretch the arms a little bit longer, this is where you could do that by just quite literally stretching it out and letting it dry a little bit longer. Do be careful though, because your sleeves can grow quite a bit during this. So if they are the right length, you don't want to stretch them too much. And mine are the perfect length, so I just want to get mine nice and straight, and then make sure all your hems are flat as well. So that's going to be a big focus with this bottom hem, because if you remember, it kept wanting to flip up and we don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to work on making the shape what I'm looking for, making sure all of this is nice and smooth. And I don't know why I'm breathing so heavy, but so far it's looking like this. I almost need a second towel, so I might go grab that just to keep that sleeve flat, and then I can space the sleeves out a little bit more so they're not right up against the body. But I'm gonna finish smoothing this out and then I'll show you the entire thing when it's finished. Okay, so this is what it looks like, and I'm literally just going to let this sit here and dry in this shape. So the entire chest area is smooth. That'll hopefully get rid of some of those bumps that were in there earlier. The other thing to really be careful when you are laying this down to block is the edges here, because it can be really easy to kind of stretch them out in different shapes, and you just want to make sure that if you like a kind of finished looking sweater that you keep the edges square, and also make sure that the middle is even with the outside edges, and you can just do that by pulling on it and adjusting it. The sleeves, I think I'm gonna pull them and stretch them out just a little bit more, but for the most part this is what it looks like for the blocking process. And so I'm just gonna let this sit and air dry. I like putting the towel down because I don't like trying to wring too much water out when I'm blocking, and the towel just kind of stops water from sitting on the floor for too long. So it does take a little bit longer to dry this way, but in about 2 or 3 days it should be completely dry. And after like a 24-hour period, I'll probably come in and take the towel out and either put a new towel down if it's still pretty damp, or just leave it like that. The other thing you can do is you can use a fan to help circulate some air around the sweater. But this is essentially the blocking process, is just letting it sit here and dry in the shape that you want it to be. So when the drying process is finished, I'm going to do a try on for you guys, and then that will be the end of this vlog. Okay, it is now after Christmas, and I started filming this video like back in October. It took me until December to finish the sweater just because I was working on some other projects and also just busy with other life things. And then I did do all of the blocking before the holidays so I could wear my new sweater to all of our various Christmases and such. But now it's finally time to end the video. So I'm gonna put the camera down so that you can see the full sweater now that it's fully blocked. But here it is. You can see that it lays nice and flat now. There's none of the bubbling that we were seeing before, but don't mind that there is probably going to be some dog hair on this because we picked up our puppy while we were down south, and also because of that he did get a hold of one of the stitches and there's now a little bit of a hole, so just ignore that part. That's not part of the pattern. That was just user error on my part. So I am going to put this down so you can see the whole sweater. So this is the finished Mudo sweater. It turned out even better than I expected it to. If you guys see the back here, it was very, very easy to knit. Like I said, very beginner friendly. And I am already working on a second one in a oatmeal and forest green. I'm actually knitting for somebody else. So that is the end of this knitting vlog. Thank you for following along to make the Mudo sweater. And since starting filming this video, I have made a Instagram specifically for all of my knitting content. So if you want to follow along there and see more up-to-date updates, it is at Shayna Knits. I'll put a little thing in the bottom of the screen, and also I will put it in the description as well. So definitely let me know if you guys want to see more knitting projects. I have a couple goals for this year for knitting. So the first is that I picked up a whole bunch of yarn over the holidays, so I want to use up as much of that as possible before I go shopping for new yarn. And then I also am in the process of attempting to design my own sweater pattern. So I have a couple of patterns out already on Ravelry and on my website. I have one for an egg apron and one for a checkered headband, and I'm working on a few other headband patterns as well, so definitely make sure you check that out. It'll be in the description, the link to my homesteading / knitting store. But that is the end of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one.